Dr. Robyn Faith Walsh, I really appreciate your time to do these lectures and to take this interview and discuss a little bit about what these lectures are on. And the one we're talking about with the Gospels, you go into the genre and who were these authors, which you've got to get the lectures so you can check it out. But there are a lot of apologists that will say stuff like, yeah, this fits biographical, literature. And they've read other stuff and they see biographical literature. But it almost seems like to their audience, when they hear that, it's like, well, this must be like accurate historical biographical information that's literally going to tell you exactly what Jesus did or said. And so when we get into that fanciful miraculous, it just fits in with, well, this guy was a Jew who was born in Nazareth, who, may have visited the temple and maybe was really crucified by the Romans, all of this stuff. So the mundane to the miraculous becomes kind of like, this is accurate factual information. As a scholar, just by the way I painted that, I want you to just speak from your mind, your heart. What do you think when I say that? I don't care where you go with this.
It's a really great question because it comes down to something I present in the lectures, which is we have to be very deliberate about the questions we want these texts to answer and we're asking of these texts versus what they are offering us, what questions they, the original authors, the writers, are trying to answer. One thing we have to keep in mind in the ancient world, biography, even history, is not the same way it is today. Today we have more tools and greater communication and different standards so that something to be historically true or biographically true, we expect there to be actual verifiable fact, right? Think about how media works. If something's in a newspaper, you need to have multiple sources confirming information before it's ever put out into the world. That's not the world of the first century. In the first century, there was an awareness, I think, that you couldn't, obviously Google an answer to something to confirm, say, a date of when somebody was really emperor even, or down to, like you were saying, I like that idea of the mundane, like really precise information about like who was governor of Syria in 4 BCE. You couldn't do that easily in the ancient world. Communication wasn't quite the same, documentation wasn't the same, literacy wasn't the same. So being aware of that, authors were more concerned with giving you an impression of what someone was like in their estimation, or kind of a sense of what would it be like to be around this guy. So an example that I like to give is Plutarch. He does a life of Alexander the Great, who was supposed to be, this great warrior, sort of the pinnacle of like masculinity and an ideal human being from the perspective of the Roman Empire and really the ancient Mediterranean world. He goes into a lot of detail about how did Alexander smell? Why was he such a drunk? Why did he drink so much beer, essentially? But he tries to give you this impression of what was it like to hang out with this guy. Not the minute detail of every single battle he was ever in or every war he ever won, but more what is the general sense of what this person was like. That's what they're trying to do too. They give you some detail about, say, let's just think about Matthew and Luke, about Jesus's infancy. But they actually contradict each other because the point wasn't exactly what happened there, but kind of giving you an impression of what happened. With the Synoptic Gospels, you could have the same exact story told 3 times, but with little tweaks and twists and turns to them. I think we mentioned in the lectures that Luke has a whole shipwreck nobody else has. But that's because they're each trying to give you a different impression of who this character Jesus is. And the objective is really to give a sense of character, not biography, because you have to kind of take the author's word for it. But there is, again, an awareness in the ancient world that somebody isn't going to be really fact-checking you. So you do things like encode eyewitnesses into the text as an author to tell you, like, don't take my word for it. There's an eyewitness that tells you the same thing, right? So you see those strategies. Those are strategies of authors to get across biography, the life of somebody, without having to get bogged down in what is the exact history.
So when you hear within the literature of the Gospels, or any other literature, someone has an eyewitness that saw, for example, Julius Caesar, here's this comet, right? So there seems to be natural phenomena that they are trying to say there's evidence of an apotheosis or being celestially divinized, or however you want to put it. But then there are other accounts where there are eyewitnesses who saw this, or they even pay people to say certain things. Do you bat an eye when you hear things like the gospel saying there are eyewitnesses to this, or this eyewitness saw that? Or like, do you go, oh, this one might be real? What happens in your head when you see that versus maybe someone like me 12 years ago who saw that and go, there were real eyewitnesses?
It's really difficult, right? Because something like the preface to Luke, where he says, I've read everything I could get my hands on, and I've talked to people, and he kind of says like he talked to people who talk to people, but there are eyewitnesses to the word. And so I'm trying to write that down too. Strategy for approaching the text in terms of like, he's trying to get you to realize like he's confirmed his sources to some extent, right? But also then I wonder, who are those people who are claiming they are eyewitnesses? Like, how do you know that that's true, or eyewitnesses of eyewitnesses, right? That's where you start to play that game of historical telephone. So when I read something like that, I'm automatically a little bit dubious on multiple registers, if you see what I mean. It gives me an idea that there are people maybe running around making that claim, but then from the level of literary authorship, authors are gonna always claim that, right? Because they want you to read their work. So they're always gonna say, you know, we see this with someone like Herodotus, right? He'll be like, we know there was a volcano somewhere, and so I talked to people who saw the volcano. Now I'll tell you what they report. So this is not unique, right? It's not unique to the Gospels. Again, it gives you a little idea of maybe process, but I also know from other quote unquote historians that that's just what you say. And then for authors like, say, Mark, who doesn't claim to be a historian, actually his text is very esoteric. The point seems to be confused, not to be told anything concrete. Those eyewitnesses become a literary strategy. You put the eyewitnesses in the text because you just said something crazy. You just said something that, you know, Jesus has performed some kind of wonder, some kind of miracle, that other people who are not, you know, initiated into this Christ cult may read this and go, he did what? And so if you encode an eyewitness, it's a rhetorical strategy to say, like, there were people there, like, you know, listen to this. And it's sort of there as like a carrot to draw you in. So it's hard to say what to make of eyewitnesses. We want to think that that means it's verifiable fact. We just have too many examples in the ancient world of people making really radical claims and taking the same kind of position. In paradoxography, it's all over the place. I'm thinking of Phlegon, who says that I think there's a centaur that he says he's talked to people who have seen that the centaur was like embalmed and is somewhere in like the imperial household. So he claims that eyewitnesses have seen a centaur, right? So it doesn't have to just be sort of like plausible things. You use the idea of an eyewitness for even, you know, very extraordinary claims. So we have to be very careful with how we understand that.